Chief, William Shakespeare wrote that there is nothing good or ill, but thinking makes it so. And he may have actually been wrong. There may be actually some demonstrable bad and good in the world. But I was recently talking with the artist Donald McGraw, who took from the tragic incident at Burnt Church an assignment to meet you and your fellow chiefs and paint their portraits and try to make that a step towards reconciliation. I have his perspective. What's yours?
He's right. When Donald and I talked about this long ago, I recognized that what he was doing went well beyond the painting. Thought that he was giving something back, and it translated to me into what was going on all around us and how other people were struggling with words like reconciliation. When you get someone as dedicated as Donald, he's given physically, he's given financially. You can't give much more than what that man has done to make sure that the relationship between Indigenous peoples and this province is respectful, solid, honest, full of integrity, and won't depend or rely upon government initiative, mandates, Supreme Court decisions. It comes from the heart, basically. And that's the Donald McGraw that I saw. And I've often told the story of Donald because I think everybody knows that when he first asked me if I would join the Circle of Chiefs, my answer was no. Point blank, direct, and I had my reasons. So Donald, I noticed, didn't take the answer no in any way, shape, or form. And not in a negative way, but he really wanted my participation. He wanted the nation involved that saved his nation. And from that discussion and a visit to this lodge, there was just so much magic around this man that in the end I said I would, because of him, all because of him, because of his own life. This is a guy who survived. I'm sure you've heard some of the stories, but knowing that he probably should have been dead up to 4 times and thinking, I must be here for a reason. I'd rather him tell his own story. But if you can imagine how that resonated with myself, we're talking about a people, survival. We're talking about a nation that isn't supposed to be here, and yet we are. So we had commonality, but it was mostly his. He just had so much energy for doing the right thing, as I've often said, and it just resonated with myself and what I was doing, and I've never regretted it. There's never a moment of regret for having met, known Donald McGraw. I'm much richer in my life for having met such a person.
Very often the journey is as important as the outcome or the destination. So can you share why you said no to him at first?
Not a problem. I had a lot of knowledge at that point with a lot of Indigenous relations, the efforts of Indigenous peoples within their own communities. And I'm afraid I saw a lot of failure, especially in the relationship between this country, the province, and not just our nation, but all the Wabanaki nations. I read quite a bit, so I knew also that it wasn't just here, it wasn't just Canada, it's Turtle Island, and then I expanded a little bit further by saying that around the world, colonization and the treatment of those that were colonized, it should be an embarrassment for the world, and it isn't, but it becomes our way of life too. Whether we know it or not, whether we believe it or not, we start to become, we're made in their image, if you will. And that, I find, not just frustration, but I keep using the word embarrassing, but I find it disgusting. I may as well use real words here. Because we are who we are. We're different people. We are indigenous peoples. They don't have to give us sovereignty. We should know what sovereignty is, and we should know that we are not defined by rules, regulations, Supreme Courts, Indian Acts. We are defined by who we are in that river. Every nation I know along from north to south on Turtle Island are defined by their river systems. And we are no different. This is our river. This is who we are. It's the territory that defines us. We are people of the pollock, the fish along the coast, what we eat and what got us here after thousands of years. This is what makes us who we are. So I feel I understand that. I feel I know that, and I feel I have an appreciation for that, but I feel we've lost that. So for me to join a circle of chiefs that are basically a product of Indian Act, I didn't feel comfortable. And no, I didn't feel I wanted to be there. So when Donald asked me to join the Circle of Chiefs, I basically said no because I didn't think I belonged there.
Chief, if we could linger on that product of the Indian Act concept, I think that it's important to imagine maybe the U.S. or the UN coming into Canada and saying, anything passed by your Senate is now the law. It's not the House of Commons anymore, it's the Senate, or it's the provinces, or it's municipalities. In other words, tinkering with our system of government. And that's what the Indian Act did. It imposed upon Indigenous people a version of democracy that was somewhat popular in the late 19th century. And is that imposition and that presumption, really, the thing that you were resisting?
I don't believe so, Alan. I think your words are too kind. I think that, I told you I wanted to deal with real language. I don't think it was about giving us a government or even being part of the government. I think it was about destroying my people. I think it was about getting the land and making sure that there were no strings attached. I think that the genocide that people talk about was real. I know that our populations were down to numbers that if we were talking species at risk, we'd be talking beyond threatened. It would be species at risk. There'd be so few of us left that the chances of coming back would be nil. We did survive. It was a combination of fortune and good fortune, and people realizing that there was something drastically wrong and they didn't want it to happen. So the extinguishment of my people, which I believe was not an accident. I believe that in this country, it was part of the plan. They keep telling me I need a plan. I believe their plan was to say, we want the land, we don't need the people, they're a nuisance. I was told we were a problem because of the border. So I believe them. We were a problem. Having us around was just a reminder that their history is a compromised history and is founded on, as I've often said, the poverty of my people. Then, as far as I'm concerned, that's what I didn't like. This is what I'm not, this is why I'm not a fan of Indian Acts and rules and regulations. As I've said before, about us, without us, they really aren't for us. So if this is the case, and I believe it's the case, then no, that's why I didn't want to be part of it. I knew why I didn't want to be part of it, and I knew that there was no the word they banter around is reconciliation at the time. But I need to see more than reconciliation. I need to see remorse. I need to see empathy. I need to see people that are going to say, we did something wrong and we need to fix it. I don't need people telling me that they can put words on something and that's going to make it better. Words like reconciliation for the country. No, we need to see more. We need to hear more than words. We need to see action, and we need to fix this relationship. Voila, like Donald McGraw. What do I have, Hugh, that I can give back? I'm a painter. I'm an artist. I know what I can give back. So why don't politicians realize there's something they can give back? Why don't the clergy realize there's something they can give back? Why don't? It's because they're still taking on it. And if I can see this, then no, I don't want to be part of a system that's destroying my people. It's that simple. I never did, I won't. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what I saw when I saw what was happening with Circle of Chiefs and the Holburnt Church scenario and the so-called idea of creating a native fishery. I saw that. But there are too many holes in the system, and to me they were obvious, and those were put there intentionally. It was about control. They don't want to give up control. They don't want to give up ownership. They don't want to give up what they consider now to be theirs, because if they have to give something back to Indigenous peoples, then they're going to have to recognize that it wasn't just one thing, it was everything. And that's what they're having a hard time dealing with.
You've raised a very mainstream idea that is worth emphasizing in my view, and interestingly it comes from the slightly right-of-center columnist George F. Will in the U.S., a new book that he has out where he emphasizes the government doesn't give anybody any rights. The government's job is to protect the existing inherent rights that people have. And it's interesting that that intersects with your correct view that your rights arose long before and existed long before settlement and are not being bestowed upon you by anybody. And you've written essentially those words.
I have. I think that I take the reference you're giving me. And when we talk about governments, I think it goes beyond, and that's not just Indigenous now. Governments are, in my mind, theoretically, the representation for the people. They're supposed to represent us. When we say that they should represent us, that's where I think they should have looked after not just Indigenous peoples, not just what's around us, trees, forests, ecosystems, ecology, the environment, not just the animals, but their own people. I think they've fallen through the cracks with their own people. I think that they no longer represent anyone other than corporations. I think that when corporations were given human rights, these are the people that they tend to represent, and I think that they've forgotten that their role is to look after and protect the very people that elected them. And as a minority within this culture, that's a responsibility as well. So if they're not doing this, who is? Are we supposed to put our faith in corporations? Are we supposed to put our faith in entities that have done everything they possibly could to rape, pillage, and plunder every resource? I don't think so. And this is one of the reasons the Indigenous people want a recognition of their rights, because the great father that was supposed to look after us with all those promises, the treaties that were supposed to be part of that with all those promises, are things that we've realized have never occurred. So what should we do? I think that we have to find a way to take it back. And if that means that they've got to play around in their courts to decide if that's legal or not, that's fine. But as human beings on this planet, if you will, like, we can talk about Mother Earth, we can talk about Indigenous peoples, we can talk about all of that. But as human beings, we have another role to play. I talked about Donald McGraw. What do we have that we can give back? Human beings have to start giving something back to this planet, and we have to start looking after giving the trees that we're taking, the waters, the fish that we're taking. We have to give something back. You can't have a take system and leave something for the future. Ain't gonna happen. So as far as I'm concerned, part of the role of our role is to hold these politicians accountable, and not just every 4 years. They have to be reminded every day that they are to represent us. They need to protect us. It doesn't have to be ownership.
There's another thought you brought to my mind. We have both read the great Thomas King and heard his Massey lecture. And to paraphrase him, he spoke about what I'm calling the cliche Indian, the noble savage, probably both incorrect. And, you know, I'm getting the impression that you didn't want to put yourself in that category by being painted by Donald McGraw until you felt comfortable with his mission. Am I making a reasonable connection there?
Yes, but the difference between you and I is you use the right word. You're reasonable. So let's go to the unreasonable. Let's go see where Huey comes from with this one. Because my favorite book from Thomas King is actually The Inconvenient Indian.
Yes.
And I think I'm more of an inconvenient Indian. So coming at it from this direction and incorporating the Donald McGraw approach, I was more of an inconvenience. My role, you've got to remember, was one of the nations, a nation that didn't exist in Canada's books, a nation that was digitally, legally removed through what I call the magic of their governments and their laws. So rules, regulations, laws, and courts. Don't forget, it wasn't always Supreme Court decisions coming down in our favor. It was often quite the reverse. So I'm a product of that because I lost my citizenship, if you will, and I'm not talking about Canadian, when this was done. This was all done. This is not something that happened as a sidebar to something. This was done to my people and myself. So when you are dispossessed and disenfranchised, you need to look at what that part of it has done to my relationship with, for example, these other chiefs. I keep coming back to Donald McGraw, and it's a circle of chiefs. So I would have been one of 10, but there are 9 other chiefs with 9 other communities, 9 Indian Act representatives, and Huey. So where does Huey come from with all of this? Because if I don't fit with Indian Act, why am I in the circle? And it took Donald McGraw to, I shouldn't say he informed me, he woke me up. We all need those wake-up moments. And Donald did it right here. And he did it by telling me his story. When a man sits down and tells you how he survived because he clung to a weir pole in a bay for a night, or he survived because when his canoe upset, he made it to shore, but his uncle didn't, his favorite uncle. When he tells you that he's had this life where there's so much pain in it, and where he's recognized that he probably shouldn't be here, but he is here. So he's looking at the reason. These are things I related to, and these are things I understand. And so that conversation led to why I joined the Circle of Chiefs. And if there had been any other artist, this would never have happened. If it had been any other person, this would never have happened. But it was just because it was Donald McGraw, and you've interviewed him. You must know what's going on in that man's mind. And if you could take someone from the Acadian community and say, okay, after all you did for the Acadian community, is one person you would pick that you believe actually gets it, appreciates it, has respect for what happened and how it happened, I would say that would be Donald McGraw. I've dealt with the Acadian community, and I will say nothing negative on film about anyone. That's not why I'm here. But let's put it this way. A lot of people said they're going to come back and work with us and help us because if you heard my speech at the 2004 event, I mentioned that when the Acadian community needed a hand up, it was my people that did it. And now we need a hand up. Who will be there to help us? And I was told that the Acadian community would be there for us. And that's about it. Canada is supposed to be there for us. And in a way they are, because we're negotiating. But when the negotiations are taking 20-some years, you kind of wonder, where is the real intent? Is there a desire to fix this? Is there? And I know that there are a lot of good people in the room who would like to make this happen, but the decision makers need to take a stand. They need to stand up, and they need to say it was wrong. We're going to fix it, and they can fix it overnight, because they can break anything overnight. They can fix it overnight, but instead, oh no, we have to go through a process. Oh no, there's this. There are rules and regulations, and we need to work within those rules and regulations. So it's funny how, to me, it's like the land. You can take it overnight, but you can't give it back. This is where I find something is wrong with a system like this. I'm a long ways away from Donald McGraw and the Circle of Chiefs, but I still think it's all connected.
So in the end, you conceded to his painting you. Was that a way of asserting yourself and your people officially or psychologically? How did that change your reflection on the Indian Act, your fellow chiefs, and so on?
Basically, in the end, that had nothing to do with it. That's what I had to get away from if I was going to do this. And it was Donald that got me away from it. At that point, I had to basically swallow a bullet. And I had to say, you know something? It really isn't about me. This is what Donald brought to the plate. Chief, I'm painting you, but it's your people that are going to be recognized in this portrait. They're going to talk about you and your people, and they're going to... So, he was right. I could think of myself and why I didn't want to be there, or I could say, you know something, Donald's helping me bring awareness to my people, to a nation. And it was a good time with the 2004 event, hitting the pretty well every newspaper in the country. It was on TV. It was a hot item. So toss into that I've got this incredible artist doing this incredible work, and it was just another notch in our favor, if you will, and another way of pointing at the nation. You know, pay attention. He's part of this, the chiefs. Pay attention, because he didn't just paint me. He painted the island. He painted the event. He painted everything that people were going to talk about in 2004. And what he did for me, he put it under my left arm, closest to the heart. That's what he did. And knowing his thinking, and knowing what he was going to do, and knowing too that the last thing he paints are the eyes. And I have very sad eyes. And he noticed all this. And when somebody tells you about your reflection, sometimes there's a different picture than looking in a mirror. And that's what I saw, and that's what he brought to me, and that's what it meant. No, it wasn't about Huey needed to reach some conclusion with the Indian Act. No, my deal was with Donald McGraw, the person, and I've never regretted it.
And that gesture that you're making, which puts
Mm-hmm.
the island near your heart, is also, I'm never sure whether it's a wave or it's an acknowledgement or it is a receptivity. And I guess it's up to the viewer to decide, but what does the subject think about that gesture?
I've often seen it the same way. And by that I mean as a question. It was something that happened right there, out there on that lawn. These are a series of pictures taken, and you have to remember, Donald's wife took, I don't know how many rolls of film with different poses and what we were doing. So Donald picked this. Did I ask him if it was a wave? No, I didn't. Did I ask him if I was holding my hand up for any other reason? No, I didn't.
But did he ask you?
No. He's the artist. The work is his. I had faith in him. And what he saw, he saw. Donald tells me, I've learned long ago that the best way to find the truth is to wait for it. It will come to me. But if you push it and you ask for it, then you usually get the artificial. People will tell you almost anything they think you want to hear. Donald and I have a very unique relationship. I do not question him. I do not ask him. I let him do what he does because that's his profession. He's never questioned me about the role I play as chief. And that's part of our relationship. So, no, as far as holding the hand up, people have asked me the very same question. It's amazing, but that's the number one question people will ask. Are you waving to welcome them ashore? Are you holding your hand up as some sort of a symbol or signal? And the answer is no, I'm holding my hand up because Donald asked me to hold my hand up out there, and that's what I did. How it
Well, Robert,
translated into the picture, that's not my answer.
Robert Frost comes into this discussion because he was asked, this is the man who read a poem at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, and he was asked one time, does a particular line in your poem mean X, Y, and Z? And he thought for a moment and he said, probably does by now, meaning how the art interacted with the public is as important as what the subject thought or maybe even what the artist thought. It's the public's perception of it as well.
Yeah. And now that's part of the magic of art. It's subject to interpretation. If somebody else sees it, they're going to see something probably totally different, maybe something we never expected. But I think that art, poetry, when people say, what does this mean? And they try to nail it down to one thing, I think they take the magic out of it. I'd rather have people look at it and say, oh, look, he's welcoming my people. Oh, look, he's must be raising a hand to a higher power. I don't need to know that. And the very fact that Donald told me, I put the island under your left arm because it's close to your heart, that's all I need.
Now you are also wearing a very distinctive outfit that I think you should speak about.
Again, it's everything comes full circle. So the first time I saw this outfit was in this room when I visited the lodge. I had no idea that my great uncle's, I won't call it a costume, but his clothing was still here and preserved by the very people that he was a guide for. And let's be honest. It's not like when he died, people thought of returning things. It wasn't that they said, well, let's hide it from him. I think they just kept it respectfully because it belonged to this person who was well liked here. I learned that by speaking to Mrs. Orser before she passed. And it was quite the story of how, as a young child, she had this relationship with this old Indian guide. So I do believe that what they kept that was his was respectful. I also believe that if it had been in our possession, my possession, it probably wouldn't be here, to be honest. Did I have a place to keep things, to store things? No. It probably would have been worn by young people growing up, and it would have been a costume at events. But would it have been cared for? No. And would it be here? No, I have no doubt. So in a way, I have an appreciation for the artifacts that came out of that room, and the very fact that this outfit was still there.
And it's buckskin, right?
Yes, it is.
Is it hot to wear?
I only wore it the once, so it's not a fair question in that sense. Well, my answer wouldn't be fair. The truth is, I believe it was a cool day when we were doing this, and I was very distracted because when Donald saw the outfit, he wanted to meet here. He wanted to see the artifacts I'd talked about. He wanted to talk to me about my great uncle and how he had.
And is this your great uncle?
Yes, that would be Horace Nicholas, of course. And the stories about Horace around here, that's what I shared with Donald. But Donald is the artist, and Donald took one look at the outfit and he said, I need to paint you in that. And my first thought is, I don't think it's ever been off the wall. I think it will fall apart if we remove it from the wall. The caretaker at this lodge is a very special person too. And he thought, no, he said, I think it would be okay, in the sense that it probably would survive the photo session. And I was totally amazed, but somehow it was still supple, soft, flexible. It didn't crack and fall apart. It was probably in better shape than the body it was on. So as far as I'm concerned, it went pretty well. However, again, the outfit went back on the wall. I understood that this was all the property of Mrs. Orser at the time. I had no plan or vision of everything coming full circle again and how it would come back to our tribe. But that's exactly what happened. And these artifacts now that are in the museum in Ottawa are well cared for. Eventually they'll come home when we have the proper facilities. But right now, the story of the outfit and knowing that the very outfit he's wearing in that picture is the very outfit I'm wearing in the painting, is the very outfit that's in our collection. It's going to be another one of those paths or trails that tell the story of our nation here.
And I think I recall you're telling me a story that outfit, while being worn by your great-uncle, visited the streets of Boston.
Yes. This was what he used when they went to Boston to sell their wares. The nation and almost every family in the nation at the time was very good at making baskets, beadwork, etc. And there are pictures of my great uncle in Boston with a lot of that outside a teepee where they're selling it to basically people that could afford it. And as a result, that it was very traditional for the nation to find its way to Boston for these events. And that's where the Central Plains headdress comes from, because our turkey feather headdresses weren't really recognized as fancy native headdresses. So a lot of Wabanaki people, and you'll see that in the book on the Circle of Chiefs, quite often they use the long flowing eagle feather headdresses, because this is again where the image of Indian comes from.
Fulfilling expectations.
Absolutely. And there again is that long story about, we've almost come full circle back to Thomas King and his, the truth about stories and the inconvenient Indian. It's all in there. And it's a great way for me to find out that a lot of the things that I'm feeling, other people are feeling them too. And he puts them so well into words that it's sort of, every time I read something of his, it's a new type of awareness.
Well, it's brilliant, and so was the Dead Dog Cafe on CBC Radio, which
Yes.
he helped write. What year was your great uncle in Boston?
That would probably be in the 1920s to 30s. I'm going by the age of the pictures and when he died. I never did know my great uncle. There's no overlap in his passing and my birth. I was born in 46. So he passed before that, and as you can see, he was a fairly old man then. Although it's funny, I talk about him being an old man, and I'm 75, so I'm an old man too. And when I look back and say, I wonder, who knows whether he was 60, 70, I'm not really quite sure. Even when they talk about John Nicholas and how things happened on his 80. I have articles on him being 80, 90, and 100. So this man who lives to be 103 or 104, I'm starting to reassess what old means.
Right.
Because I don't feel it.
75 is feeling a lot younger than it used to.
There's a lot of denial here.
The reason I asked you that question of what year was it, it was the decade 25 to 35 is roughly around the time that my father and his parents drove from Nova Scotia to Montreal to emigrate and get a better job and have a better life and what have you. And he said it was an onerous trip, sitting on rough car seats and bumpy roads and what have you. So the Beskotomakati people who took the trouble to go all the way to Boston with their wares and with, I guess, a collapsible teepee and with your great uncle's suit or outfit or what we should call it, garb. That was pretty industrious. That's kind of like very industrious people selling their potatoes in Europe, or what my grandfather did, loading a ship full of deal, and deal was wood or coal or fish or whatever you could get, and then going down what was called the Boston States to sell it. But your people must have gone by railroad or by even wagon, perhaps. Do you know anything about how they got there?
I do not. And when I think about it, I often think about different modes of transportation that were used here and the stories I've read. Absolutely, railroad was a high probability, because it was common in our lives to basically ride the rails. In some form or other, there are numerous stories around here about how the CPR Railroad appreciated the fact that their turnaround spot in St. Andrews was on Indian land, and the old Indian there at the time, that would be Horace's father, John Nicholas, was given free rail passage anywhere. Now these could be just stories, but there are people who remember seeing a train stop in Shamcook, and this old Indian with his canoe would get on board and they'd give him a ride to St. Andrews. This is different from our thinking of what the rail is, and as a result, I believe that they probably did ride the rails. There were ways they did it, whether they did it, had the money to do it or not. I'm not so sure that was a question back then. And I think that it probably would have been the rails. Having said that, we also have stories of canoe trips down to Boston, which wasn't done along a river system, it was done along the coast. So our people were quite capable of doing things that today we don't understand, because we think of these as difficult chores, and for them it was just their standard way of life. However, I do believe that if you're going down to display your wares, you need to cart a lot of things, you're taking your whole family, I would think that they'd hop the rail somehow, and somehow the rail system accommodated them. I'd like to think it was something like the way they treated my great-grandfather when he needed to get from here to Shamcook, or from St. Andrews to Shamcook. And that would be a respect for the fact that the rails are on our lands. And it wasn't just Indian Point, it's everywhere. So again, I'd like to think there's a good news story in that.
Well, a canoe trip to Boston sounds to me to be even a little more adventurous than Thor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki expedition.
Well, the story I remember the best, and we can go back to Thomas King on this one, because he'll tell you that if you want to remember history, listen to the stories. One of my favorite is how a couple of Passamaquoddy Indians got lost when they were out porpoise fishing. And they ended up going down the coast, and when they went down the coast, they went a little further down the coast, and they kept going, and they did end up in Boston. Now, somewhere along the way, whether it was on where they came ashore or how they got to Boston in the first place, I'm not quite sure. But where they were lost and where they were seeking help, they wanted to go see the Great Father. The Great Father was George Washington. So when they got to Boston, they needed to catch the rail to go to Washington. So the story is that they went to Washington, Washington, D.C., and he got them home. He got them on a rail and gave them passage back to good old Passamaquoddy territory from Washington. That's a documented story I read. I'm not exactly sure where, but there's so many stories like that, articles in the newspaper. This is not something I read just because somebody wrote it down. It's one of those stories that I figure come out of their history. So instead of me repeating just something that sounds like it's a legend.
Well, it has some validity and credibility, because in those days, right up until Lincoln's time, I think you could just walk into the White House and mill around, and if you happened upon the president, have a conversation with him. So that may well be the case.
Well, one of the first treaties he signed as president was the Watertown Treaty with Wabanaki peoples. That's a fact. So the United States, and their first treaty, was with our people. It wasn't with the other governments. It wasn't with other countries. They had signed a treaty with our people. I think that was pretty powerful, because back then, you could have a personal relationship with the president. It wasn't that they did call him the Great Father, but was he an entity in England? No. He's just down the shore in, I call it Wabanaki country, but at least Lenni Lenape country. And so they thought they'd pay him a visit, and he gave him a ticket home. It's really simple, but for me, it's the, what would you call it? There's almost the humor of how things happen, not because, again, there was any plan in it. They weren't planning to go to Boston. They certainly weren't planning to go to Washington. But if you get to Boston, you want the Great Father to get you home. They went to see the Great Father. And he gave them a ticket and they went home.
Now, back to your friend Donald McGraw. Have you spent much time with the other portraits? as you have with yours, and noticing what the artist did with your wave and so on. Do you have comments on any of the other portraits? And the symbolism, the meaning?
I have not. I do know that one of the most powerful portraits is the one on the cover of that book. And I've seen that anywhere I've seen discussions on that topic. That's the portrait everyone refers to. My portrait, again, it goes back to everything goes back to Donald McGraw with me on this, with my stories and stuff. There was an event to honor Donald up in his home up around Trackley, Shiloh. And I love the story because it should show people just how modest this man is, and how unselfish, because he was there to be honored as an artist. He was there to be honored for the Circle of Chiefs. And when I went to that event, and I still hadn't spent a lot of time with Donald personally, his wife called me and said, Donald's getting an award, he would like you to be there. So I thought, you know something, this is a man who's done an incredible thing for my nation, for all the Indigenous nations. We need to go and honor him at his award. I went to the event. The honest truth is, I needed to get in and out. I was due in Toronto the next day and I was driving. So I thought, if I can go to the event, and as soon as the event's over, I'm in my car and I'm going across the north of the province and beetling into Toronto for my meeting. But the moment I got there, things took a life of their own. So I'm sitting at the back talking to a native associate, friend, whatever, that we just had some stories to tell, and everything was going according to plan until a young fellow comes up and said, no sir, you can't sit here. You're a chief, you have to go sit up front. And I was like, actually, it's really comfortable here. I'm talking to my friend, and I don't need to be, in a special seat anywhere. And I said, I'm just here to honor Donald. And I could see that everybody was trying to get to him. He was busy. Every dignitary was there. This is an auditorium in a gymnasium at the school where it was full. And the young fellow went and said something to Donald, so I thought, good. And I turned around and I started talking to my friend again. And the young fellow's tapping me on the shoulder and he's saying, sir, I was told that you need to go to the front because the chiefs need to be honored. And it was almost embarrassing because the young fellow wasn't going to leave me, and people were starting to notice that there's this discussion going on at the back of the room. So I said, okay. And I went around, and the seat was right in the middle of the auditorium, right in the front row. And I turned to my left, and there was one chief there, and turned to my right, and there was another chief there. There were only 3 of us that went out of all the Circle of Chiefs to thank him for what had happened. So I thought it was important that I was there at the front. And then when the events started and they had the stage, and I'm right in front of the stage, and Donald McGraw gets up on the stage, he was given every possible accolade. You know how the politicians get up there and honor him with their wonderful words, and people from the community honor him. Everybody was there to honor Donald McGraw. And then they asked him to say a few words. And this man stood up there, and I'll still always see him walking over to the edge of the stage and saying, there's only one reason I'm here, and it's because of him. So at this point, I'm really in trouble.
That's you.
That was me, because I wasn't expecting any of this. And he talked to the Acadian people about what they owed my people, about what 2004 was about the first footprint in the Americas. Everybody thought it was Port Royal the next year. It was not. And so after this event, and first of all, you have to understand that I couldn't get over what he was doing. He never said one word about himself. He never took one bit of credit, accolade for the wonderful work he had done. And yet, when it was over, he was whisked off that stage so fast that you could tell that there was a discomfort level for others who were there. And I was telling you, there were a lot of politicians, a lot of people representing Canada, a lot of people representing New Brunswick. And they whisked him out and said, well, we have a reception, da-da-da-da-da-da. And they just took him off the stage. And I jumped up on the stage because I couldn't get to him. So I went over and grabbed the mic and I was saying, Donald, Donald. But then there's this guy in back pulling plugs. And I go over and I tap him on the shoulder and I said, Minna, now. I said, no, Minna. And he looks at me at first, he really didn't know what it is, and all of a sudden he starts pushing these things in. And all of a sudden this Donald comes across and everybody stops going out the door. And I said, Donald, I have not said thank you. You cannot go out that door until I have said thank you. He comes across the stage. Most of the people are standing and getting ready to leave. And I told him, I said, I can't believe what you just did. We're here to honor you. Everyone is here to honor you. And you turned it into more awareness for my people. And this story about the awareness of me joining the circle. And when I said this, I said, I have to say thank you. Well, look, the two of us hugged each other, and we couldn't say a word. We were both crying like babies. And that's where I had a whole new world around this man, his work, his dedication. That's where it all came together. So we've both never forgotten that event in honor of Donald McGraw, what it meant. And I couldn't get away from the event because the whole forum, not the dignitaries, they did their thing and whisked Donald out to his reception. But when that amphitheater, or whatever you call it, the auditorium broke down, everybody rushed to me. And they were getting me to sign their books, and most of them were angry, and I kept hearing, why don't we know our own history? Why do we have to do something like this to find out our own history? And they all thought it was a year later, 1605, when they had a footprint in Canada. Because nobody wanted to talk about my people. Nobody wanted to talk about the event where we saved their first settlers. So this book was so powerful to them. And long story short, Huey was late getting to Toronto, but that was fine. It was a most incredible session, and I've always felt welcome in that community ever since, and I was invited back time and again. That was the real connection, and that was Donald McGraw that made all that. So I've actually forgotten your original question, but...
It was to talk about Donald McGraw and the other portraits and any recollections or impressions you have of the other portraits.
And the other thing that came out of that was when Donald was talking to me later, he said, did you notice that everybody wanted this picture at the front? Because Roger is well known. in that location, the North Shore Mi'kmaq. That's his home, his community, it's all there. So that was the portrait on the front. But Donald said, "Did you see where I put your portrait?" It was on the left side because it was closest to my heart. That's Donald McGraw. So his thinking, it's real. He carries it not into just as into a portrait. It's in his heart. It's what he thinks. It's what he does. And that's why it means a lot more to me than just a picture. The picture is actually the awareness. That's fine. I can give that to the nation saying, take it, run with it, do what you will with it. But the real magic, again, is getting to know Donald McGraw. That's the truth.